Hello and thanks for watching. The second video on chapter 2 is angles and parallel lines. In this lesson, we're going to use the measures of angles on two parallel lines cut by a transversal and use that angle measurement to figure out the angle measurements of other angles identified or created with the two parallel lines cut by a transversal. Now, if we review from what we talked about in the other video, parallel lines and transversals, well, if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then we end up creating 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of congruent angles, and well, not specifically two, but two ways to create supplementary angles. Now, if we recall, corresponding angles, alternate interior angles to alternate exterior angles are all congruent. The same thing with vertical angles. Those are also congruent. Linear pairs are supplementary, and consecutive interior angles are supplementary. And if we know one of the angle measures, then we can figure out all of them. So, for example, this angle of 1 is 65 degrees. So let's highlight that. Let me zoom in a little bit more. And let's highlight this angle 1. And the measurement of angle 1, again, is 65 degrees. Now, since that one is 65 degrees, we know that the vertical angle, which is 3, is also going to be 65 degrees. Now, from there, let me get my highlighter. I have my inside. Everything inside, again, the yellow is considered to be the inside in between the two parallel lines. So that's angles 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we have our outside exterior angles, the ones that are above or below the parallel lines. And we can now create other things. We have also our transversal. Our transversal is this line right here. This is our transversal. And since this is 65 degrees, then angle 5 is also going to be 65 degrees because they're alternate interior angles. This angle is on the right side. This angle is on the left side, on the opposite sides of the transversal, and both in between the two parallel lines, they are alternate interior angles, which means that angle number 5 is going to be 65 degrees. And because angle 7 is vertical to that, that means that this one is also going to be 65 degrees. Angle 1 and angle 3 are vertical angles. That's why we know it's 65 degrees. Angle 3 and angle 5 are alternate interior angles. That's we know they're congruent. And angle 5 and angle 7 are vertical angles, and that's how we know that they're congruent. Now, since those things are going to be congruent relative to angle number 1, well, angle number 1 and angle number 2, or angle number 1 and angle number 5, those are going to create linear pairs, which means that they have to add up to 180 degrees. So if I get 180 and I subtract the 65, that's equal to 115. So angle number 2 has a measurement of 115. And let's do that in green instead. And because angle 2 and 4 are vertical angles, that means that angle 4 is 115 degrees. Since angle 4 and angle 6 are alternate interior angles, they're on opposite sides of the transversal. 4 is on the left, 6 is on the right, and they're on the inside in between the two parallel lines. They're alternate interior angles, so that one is also going to be 115 degrees. And the other angles, angle number 8 is also 115 because it's vertical to angle 6. So pretty much the exact same reasons, just with 115, we get the measurement of the other one. So starting at the very beginning, I knew that angle 2 was 115 because angle 1 and angle 2 are linear pairs, which means that they add up to 180. And then angle 2 and angle 4 are vertical angles. Angle 4 and angle 6 are alternate interior angles. And then angle 6 and angle 8 are vertical angles. So there would be congruent. Now notice it's the exact same two numbers on all of them. They're either the angles, the remaining angles are going to be equal to 65, or they're going to be equal to 115. And as you can see, all of the obtuse angles are 115, and all the acute angles are 65. So that's really the only thing that could happen. Either the two angles are going to be equal to each other, or the two angles were equal to 180 degrees. The sum of the two angles is 180. So you can either set them equal to each other, or you can either add them to get a total of 180. And even if you're not, again, familiar or still have trouble identifying the relationship between the two angles on a set of parallel lines cut by a transversal, intersected by a transversal, you can use the fact that because we're only creating, again, an acute and obtuse angle, you can then verify that all the obtuse angles are going to be equal to each other, all the acute angles are going to be equal to each other, and that one acute and one obtuse angle will add up to 180 degrees. So for example, look at this example right here. Notice how this angle here, angle X, this angle right here, that one right there, is an obtuse angle. And this angle, the 120, is an acute angle. So the obtuse angle and the acute angle obviously are not going to be equal to each other. So that would mean then that they have to add up to 180 degrees. So that means that the value of X has to equal to 160. And again, if you're not sure what the actual relationship between those, why is it that they do that, that's fine. Just understand again that because we have an obtuse angle up here, because we have an obtuse angle up there and acute angle down there, then they are going to be not equal to each other. They are not going to be equal to each other. Thus, the only other option is that they will then have to be supplementary to each other. So for the third example, let's figure out the measurement of angle B. Well, we know that this angle here, this acute angle, is 45. So that means that all the other acute angles, which is this one here, angle C, and angle A, are all going to be equal to 45 degrees. All the obtuse angles, which is this one right here, angle B, and this one right here, those red angles would have to add up with the 45, with the acute angles, to equal to 180. So that's how I'm going to figure out the measurement of angle B. I'm going to get the angle of B added with the 45 degrees, and that has to equal to a sum of 180 degrees. So subtracting 45 from that, from 180, we get that the value of B would have to equal to 135. Now, in example number 4, we have that the figure below shows parallel lines cut by a transversal. What is the sum of the degree measure of angle Q and 45? So they want us to add Q. So let me write this down and I'll put it over here and put a little star on it. What they want us to do is to get the value of Q and add it to 45 and identify, okay, what is that going to equal to? Well, I first need to figure out what the value of Q is. Well, Q is this obtuse angle here. And the only angle measurement we know is the 45. And 45, well, that's an acute angle. This right here happens to be consecutive interior angles, which means that they're supplementary, or easier way of understanding this, or easier way of explaining this, is that because we have an acute angle and an obtuse angle, they're not going to be equal to each other, but instead add up to 180 degrees. So if I get the value of Q and add it with 55, I know that that has to equal to 180 degrees. So subtracting 55 from the 180, we find that the value of Q is going to equal to 125. So as a result, we end up with Q as 125, and as a result we can now figure out again that the value of Q and 45, or the sum of the value of Q and 45. So now we can answer this question right there. So substituting in Q with 125, adding it with 45, we get that the answer is going to be 170. So what is the sum of the degree measure of Q and 45? Well, the answer is 170. So let's move on to the next example. On the next example, we want to add X and Y. So this might seem a little confusing and probably almost impossible to figure out. But if we pay attention again to the relationship between X and Y, notice that X is an acute angle and Y is an obtuse angle. Then we know that they're not going to be equal to each other. X will never be able to equal to Y because again they're different angle measurements, and because they're not equal to each other, again then the only option is that when you add them up they have to equal to 180 degrees. And there's your answer. What is X plus Y going to equal to? X plus Y is equal to 180 degrees because we have an acute angle and we have an obtuse angle, and there's our answer, 180. Now we can now use again equations and set up an equation in order to figure out again what the values are for X and even the angle measurements themselves. So like on this example, let's figure out what the value of X is going to equal to, and if we need to, we can then figure out the value of the acute angle by substituting the value of X, whether we plug it into this green one or this orange or this red one right there. They're going to be the exact same angle measurements. Now here, in order to figure out how to create the equation, we have to know what type of angles we have. So since this angle is an acute angle and this angle is also an acute angle, they happen again to be the exact same acute angle. So that means that they're equal to each other. So 11x minus 47 is equal to 6x minus 2. So following our normal technique of letters to the left and numbers to the right, we get 7x on the left side I'm sorry, that's 6. I'm subtracting 6. So that's going to be 5x is equal to 45. And dividing the 45 by 5, we find that the value of x is equal to 9. And again, not be able to identify that the actual relationship between these things is corresponding, that these are corresponding angles, is okay. Again, it's preferred if you actually knew that there were corresponding angles, because this angle here, looking at the 4 angles that's created using again the transversal and the parallel line, we have angles 1, 2, 3, 4. Angle 4 is on the bottom left hand corner, and the same thing with the transversal and the parallel lines 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, notice that they're located in the exact same location on the bottom left hand corner from the 4 respective angles that are created. So they're corresponding angles, which means that they are congruent. But like I said, if you have difficulty identifying the relationship, you can again simply just look at the shape of the angle and identify whether it's an acute or obtuse angle, 2 obtuse angles, or in this case 2 acute angles, and then know, okay, since they're both 2 acute angles, they're going to equal to each other. Whenever, the only time they add up to 180 is when you have an acute angle and an obtuse angle. You basically end up with a linear pair, all right, or a set of supplementary angles. So for number 7, as you can see, notice that the 2 angles again are in between the set of parallel lines, so they are interior angles. And since the 2 angles are both on the left side of that red line, that red transversal line, they are consecutive interior angles, which means that they're supplementary. Another way of explaining this, notice how this is an acute angle and the 9x minus 33 is an obtuse angle, so they would have to add up to 180. So that's what I would have to do. I would have to add these up and set them equal to 180 degrees. But before we can have our letters to the left and our numbers to the right, I would have to simplify the left side of the equation. So I have a simpler form of that. So add the 9 and the 5, that's equal to 14x. Add the 3 with the negative 33, that's negative 30, and that's equal to 180. Normally we usually do that kind of work over here and do that mental math over here, but I'm just doing it right here just to get you to understand how I got that part right there. From this point on, we follow again our normal technique of solving these type of equations by using that letters to the left, numbers to the right technique, and moving anything that does not have a variable to the right side and getting it and writing it with the opposite sign. So negative 30 on the left makes it a positive 30 on the right, bringing down the 14x and adding 180 with 30, that's equal to 210. We will then continue by dividing 210 by 14 and finding that the value of x is 15. Now in this example, this one's a little bit trickier because we have to figure out 2 variables. We want to figure out the variable for x, figure out the value of x, and then using that information figure out the value of y. Well, let's start off again with the two things that have x's. So let me highlight those two things that have x's. Those two things have x's, and I want to know what the relationship between those two things are. Well, they happen to be alternate interior angles. Notice that they're both in between the set of parallel lines, so that makes them interior. And notice that they're on opposite sides of the transversal. Put the transversal in red. So they're alternating because one's on the left side and the other one is on the right side, and because they're both in between the parallel lines, they're interior angles. So they are congruent. If you notice the size of the angle, notice that this angle is an obtuse angle, just like this bottom angle right there. That's an obtuse angle. So that's another way of verifying again and identifying that they're congruent, because they're both obtuse, so they have to equal to each other. So with letters to the left and numbers to the right, we get negative 6x and positive 31. So 2x is equal to 34. And dividing by 2, we get that x is equal to 17. So now that we know that x is 17, I can now figure out the measurement of these two angles simply by plugging in 17 into the x, into either one of them. And it doesn't matter which one, because again, they're equal to each other. So if I know one, I know the other one as well automatically. Let's plug it into the bottom one. It uses smaller numbers. So let's plug it into that one. So we have, let me put it in this color. So we have 6 times the value of x plus 3. And again, x is 17. So multiplying 6 with 17, we get 102. 6 times 17 is equal to 102. We add 3, and that's equal to 105. So the measurement of this obtuse angle is 105. Now from here we have several things that we can do. We can figure out the measurement of the acute angle by subtracting 180 from by 105. Or we can add these two things together, this one and this one together, and equal that to 180. Because this angle is an acute angle, and the angle that I now know, 105, is an obtuse angle, I know adding them together has to equal to 180 degrees. So getting this and adding it with this has to equal to 180. So let's do that. The other option is, since these two angles are vertical angles, these two angles are vertical angles, they're going to equal to each other. So if I know the measurement of the acute angle, alright, so if I get 180 and I subtract 105, which is equal to 65, that means that this angle would have to be 65. And I can set this equal to 65. Either way, you should end up with the same answer. But let's do like what I said earlier. Let's add these up again, because we have an obtuse angle and acute angle. We're going to add them up and set it equal to 180 degrees. Let me move this out of the way. So I'm going to get the 5y plus 35, add the 105, okay, get this right here, add it with the 105, and that would equal to 180. Well, before I do letters to the left, numbers to the right, I will first want to simplify the left side of the equation. So I have only two numbers, and the less numbers the better. So I can add and combine these two values. Again, it's usually what I do over here. I add these two values right there. So 5y plus 140 is equal to 180. Now I'm going to do the letters to the left, numbers to the right. So that moves this over here, making it negative 140. So 5y is equal to 40, and the value of y is equal to 8. So here are my the two values to my unknowns. The value of x is equal to 17 and the value of y is equal to 8. And number 9, done pretty much the exact same way. First is to figure out the variable that just using again the two x and y's. We're figuring out x and then figuring out y. It's going to be done the exact same way. Notice again that we have only one expression that has y and we have two expressions that have x's. So I'm going to start with these two, the ones that have the x's, and see what the relationship is between these two angles right there. Well, since one of them is obtuse and the other one is acute, that means that they're going to be supplementary. I would have to add them up and set it equal to 180. So 29x minus 3 gets added up with 15x plus 7, and that has to equal to 180 degrees. Now before we go to numbers to the left and letters to the left and numbers to the right, I'm going to simplify this. So I'm going to add again the 29 and the 15, add the negative 3 and the 7 to get a simplified form of that. So 29 and 15, that's equal to 44x, negative 3 plus 7, that's equal to positive 4, and that's going to equal to 180 degrees. Now we can perform our letters to the left, numbers to the right, and we move the positive 4 to the right side, making it negative 4. We bring down the 44x, and this is equal to 176. We're going to then divide by 44, and we get 4. The value of x is equal to 4. So now that the value of x is equal to 4, I'm going to plug those in. And this time, unlike the previous example, these two angles are going to be different. Okay, they're not the same. They're going to be different. So I would have to then again determine what I'm going to use. Well, since this angle is an obtuse angle, I'm going to plug in the 4 into this angle right here because this one is obtuse as well. Those two angles are alternate exterior angles, which means that they're congruent. And I know that they're also congruent because they're both obtuse. Notice that they're both obtuse. So setting this equal to this can help me figure out the value of y. But I don't want to use this expression. What I want to do instead is plug in this number 4. Let me make this smaller, put this over here. Plug in this number 4 into 29x minus 3 and figure out what the angle measurement is going to be. So 29 times 4 is equal to 116, and 116 minus 3 is 113. So this angle measurement can be set equal to 113. So that means that all of the obtuse angles is equal to 113. So this angle is also equal to 113. So 13y, sorry about that, let me write that again, 13y minus 17, there we go, is equal to 113. And again, the reason why they're equal to each other is because they are alternate exterior angles. Okay, so look, here's the interior, here's the two parallel lines, L and M, and the inside is what I've highlighted in yellow. The transversal is this horizontal line. This is my transversal, and notice that the 113 is above and the 13y minus 17 is below. So they're on opposite sides. They're on opposite sides of the transversal, so they're alternating. And because they're not in between, they're to the left and to the right, they're not in between, The parallel lines, they're exterior. So they're alternate exterior angles, which means that they are congruent. So that's why I can set this equal to that. Visually, you can see that they're both obtuse. And because they're going to be the same obtuse angle, you can also equal them to each other, just like I've done right there. So now, using again our letters to the left and numbers to the right, I will add the 17 with the 113, getting us a total of 130, and dividing the 130 by 13 is going to give us 10. So here are the answers. X is equal to 4, Y is equal to 10. So those are the values, or yes, those are the values to our two variables. And that concludes this lesson. So just to recap, when you're trying to set up the equation and you cannot really determine what the angle relationship is, whether they're alternate interior, are they corresponding, are they linear pairs, consecutive interior, any of that stuff, then rely on just the angle size. You should be able to identify by looking at the angle, oh, this is an obtuse angle and this is an obtuse angle, so they will equal to each other, just like I did this in the example there. So they would equal to each other. Or you'll see like, oh no, this is an obtuse angle, but this is an acute angle. So that means I need to add them and set it equal to 180. So use that if you're not able to identify, again, the angle relationship, or whether they're congruent, or why they're congruent, or why they should be, what the relationship between the two angles are. Well, hopefully this was helpful, and again, thank you for watching, and I hope you watch our next video. Goodbye.